Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pandemic Emergency Assistance Fund webinar. We are excited to have you all with us. I want to just make a couple housekeeping announcements before we get started. You are going to be muted for the majority of the session. So if you have any questions at any point, please submit them into the questions box. You'll see that on your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Click on the plus next to the questions if you need to expand that. And we will be responding throughout. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but any information that we can provide during, certainly do that. And we want this to be an engaging session, so we encourage you to submit questions at any point. Also, this webinar will be recorded, so you can look forward to seeing that at a later point. And the PowerPoint is available as well. You can download it from the handouts portion of your panel also. So to get us started, I am going to turn things over to Susan Golonka, Acting Director. Susan.
Hi, thank you, Steve. Hi, I'm Susan Golonka. I'm the Acting Director of the Office of Family Assistance, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone. We have almost 200 folks listening in this afternoon to learn about the Pandemic Emergency Assistance Fund that was authorized through the American Rescue Plan, providing $1 billion through Title 4A for states, tribes, and territories to provide short-term, non-recurrent short-term expenses and benefits to families. First, I also want to recognize the efforts that all of our TANF agencies have made this past year in trying to respond to families and adapting to a virtual environment and providing services. And we know it's been a challenging year, but we've really heard a lot about some great practices and policies and innovations that all of you have adapted and adopted over this year. This fund is actually $1 billion, but all of ACF is receiving $45 billion through the ARP. And so we're excited of all the opportunities because those funds into childcare, into Head Start, to LIHEAP, they're really serving all the same families. Our intent is to administer this fund as quickly as we can. We think it's important to get the funds out to all of you so you can help start supporting families. To that end, we are kind of building the plane and flying it at the same time. And we may not have the answers to all your questions today, but your questions will help us understand the breadth of everything we need to learn and make decisions around. We will try our best to answer those that we can and then respond to the other ones through guidance and other methods. I want to introduce folks who will be helping in presenting today. Julie Siegel, who is the director of our Division of State TANF Policy. Peter Germanis, who is our national expert. And Deborah List, who is our associate deputy director. And Deborah will be fielding the questions or reading the questions to that you all will be posing. And as Steve said, we will largely hold the questions till the end of the webinar after the formal presentation, but certainly keep typing them in as you get them. That will be helpful as you have them, as that will be helpful to us. That is really all I have to say at this point, and I'm going to turn it over to Julie. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. One correction to what Susan said. We will not have all the answers to your questions, I'm quite sure, because you always ask really good questions, either things we haven't thought of or haven't figured out, or both. So yeah, please have patience with us if we cannot answer everything today, which we won't be able to. I think we can go on to the next slide. Steve. Okay, well, while we're waiting for the slides to catch up, there we go. Actually, have we gone? Yeah, okay, there we go. Actually, Susan pretty much covered this. The new Pandemic Emergency Assistance Fund was created in the new section 403C, the same place that we had the Emergency Contingency Fund, for those of you who go back that far. As she said, $1 billion to assist needy families, and it goes to all states, which includes the District of Columbia, tribes operating, tribal TANF, and all 5 US territories. So we can move on. Great. So the law specifies this allotment formula. There's $2 million that's set aside for our administration, and that includes technical assistance like what we're doing today. And then after that, 92.5%, and you can see it's over 923 million, because it's $1 billion fund, goes to states, including DC, and then the remaining 7.5% is set aside for tribes and territories. So I guess maybe the first thing to say at this point is that I know all of you want to see what your allocations, your table of allotments, and we will have that for you by sometime on Monday. We'll be putting it up. So I hope I'm cutting off a question right there. We can move on to the next slide. So the law specifies that this new fund is for non-recurrent short-term benefits, and it specifies that those non-recurrent short-term benefits are as defined on the ACF 196R, the state financial reporting form. So like all non-recurrent short-term benefits, they are intended to deal with a specific crisis situation or episode of need, must not be for ongoing needs, must not extend beyond 4 months. So those are the 3 requirements with all non-recurrent short-term benefits. And then in line with the 196R, Congress blocked out certain non-recurrent short-term benefits that they wanted this fund to pay for. And those are, as you see on the 4th bullet here, emergency assistance and diversion payments, emergency housing and short-term homelessness, emergency food aid, utilities, burial, clothing allowance, back to school, but not tax credits, childcare, transportation, or short-term education and training. And so I know it's confusing that some non-recurrent short-term benefits are in and some are out, but the ones that you report on line 15 of the 196R are the ones that this fund can pay for. Next slide. Okay, great. And yes, grantees can also use funds for administrative costs. There is a 15% cap, which you're used to on the TANF side. And then also equally important, the funds must be to supplement, not to supplant other funds. So that includes federal, state, and local among this group. Next slide. Okay, so we are designing and putting out an allotment request form for you so that you can tell us, as the law requires, within 45 days, which is April 25th, 45 days from enactment, how much of your allotment you are requesting, whether you are requesting the maximum or some amount less than the maximum. So we'll have some guidance on that form, and we're going to have some guidance coming anyway, but you should understand that this is a one-time decision. So if you choose not to, if you indicate that you are not going to use all of your allotment, you will not have another shot at those funds. And yeah, states for 45 days, tribes and territories get 90 days. And as this says, the form will be coming out as soon as we can. The period in which you can expend funds begins on April 1st and runs through September 30th of 2022, the end of FY 2022. Any funds that haven't been used by that date will go back into a pot for reallotment, which gives them another, which anyone who gets those reallotted funds will have another 12 months. And I believe the way it works is if you used up all your funds, you will have a shot at more funds. And if you did not, that you probably will not be eligible for reallotment. Is this the end of my segment? I'm not quite sure. Let's see what the next slide is. Yeah, I think, Susan, are we, am I handing this off to somebody at this point?
No, you can actually.
You want me to keep going? Okay, this is a little small for folks to see, but I'm guessing that that is line 15 of the 196R. And it's showing you that we will be modifying that form so that there will be a new column where you can report on the Pandemic Emergency Assistance Fund, much as there was for the Recovery Act funds, the Emergency Contingency Fund. And that's going to be probably the only place you would need to report something on that form for these expenditures. Okay, what's next? Slide wise, yeah. Okay, there we go. I guess I was doing the slide. So yes, there will be guidance, as I indicated. We're working on that right now. Questions, send in to the regional program managers as you always do. And we may not seem quite ready for prime time here because we wanted to get out to you as soon as we could, even before we had everything figured out. But we do want to get these funds out to you as quickly as possible and help things be as simple and easy to do as we can. I think is that the end of our slides?
Looks like it is. Yep, I think so.
Okay.
So we encourage folks to send in questions. Deborah, do we have questions to answer?
We do, and they're coming in. So first of all, there was a question about where that allotment table would be available for states. We are going to try to email it out to states and post it on our website, the allotments for states. So thank you for that question. There's also a few questions about the expenditure period and reallotment. So one question was, can you please repeat who does and does not have a shot at the reallotted funds? That might be something Peter could help with, or Julie, if you want to take that.
I don't mind jumping in, and then Peter can correct what I say as he usually does. So if you when you get your first allotment, whether it's 100% of what's available or you choose some lesser amount, you have until the end of FY 2022 to use it. If you can't use it all in that time period, we wouldn't be giving you more funds of the reallotted funds. But if you do, we'll then divide it up amongst all those who are eligible. Peter, you want to phrase it differently?
No, there's not much to correct, but basically, yeah, if you want to be considered for the allotment, you need to make sure you expend it all. That is, no unobligated balance, no unliquidated obligation remaining at the end of FY 2022. And if you're one of those states, you'll be considered for reallotment.
Okay, I think you may have just answered this next question, but let's restate it again. So when it says a state must expend the funds, by the end of FY 2022, does that mean the state must obligate the funds? Or it says, does that mean the state must obligate the funds or the clients must spend the funds?
Well, we may discuss this a little more, but it says any unused funds. Now, unused isn't really a technical term, but that sounds like they not only have to obligate them, but they actually have to spend them.
The state spends, though. We
Yes.
wouldn't track the clients, the individuals.
Oh, right, exactly.
Okay, there's also a question about would subsidized employment be an allowable expense if it doesn't exceed the 4 months?
No. I'll jump in and say no, because the 196R basically says if you can report an activity in one of the other rows, you should be reporting it there. So the only thing that should be reported on line 15 is sort of the kinds of non-recurrent short-term benefits that can't be reported elsewhere.
But if you are able to use these monies for some things that you might have used TANF for, that would free up some TANF money to do subsidized employment with.
As long as you don't supplant.
It's
Exactly.
complicated.
Okay, another good question that came in. Does the public health emergency meet the standard for short-term crisis to use non-recurrent short-term benefit funds?
Okay, so I think what we're talking about is whether really the distinction between a episode of need and a crisis situation, and which are the two terms that let you create a non-recurrent short-term benefit. And yes, we think that the extraordinary nature of the pandemic and its economic impacts constitute a specific crisis situation, which would allow a state to offer a non-recurrent short-term benefit to a broad group of families who are financially and otherwise eligible. So, for example, suppose a state might want to consider crafting a non-recurrent short-term benefit to provide extra cash to supplement lost wages for all current TANF recipient families. So inherent in that example is that this clearly meets one of the purposes. And we pretty much think that so you have to meet a purpose, but for the Pandemic Emergency Assistance Fund, it's pretty much got to be purpose 1 or 2. We don't think that 3 and 4 fit into the intent of this directly. So it meets a purpose, and then it's pandemic related. So because this is the Pandemic Emergency Assistance Fund, that would be that we would have to be something that you're trying to address the pandemic with. But I think that answers the question you're trying to get at, that yes, there is a way to do sort of blanket eligibility in a targeted sense, as long as it meets a purpose and it's for the pandemic. And that's quite different from what we normally see under TANF. Not that it couldn't happen, but generally speaking, we're looking at specific episode of need when it comes to TANF non-recurrent short-term benefits, but we are in an extraordinary situation here.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions. Okay, go ahead.
In terms of targeting, it needs to be for eligible needy families. So the state does need to set a needs criteria.
That was one of the next questions. There's a few questions around who might be eligible to receive the non-recurrent short-term benefits. So there was a question of, is it limited to needy families with children? Can 2-parent families receive it? Can immigrant non-US citizen families receive it? Or time-limited families? So I can go back over those, but it was needy, 2-parent families, time-limited families, immigrant non-US citizen families. can you talk to
Well,
those?
two-parent families, yeah, I mean, it would be up to the state to set that criterion, and it could. Time-limited families, do you mean families who have already timed out of TANF? That we think that means, and I would say that is a yes. I mean, as we said at the opening, we may have to, deliberate a little bit, but my initial reaction is yes. It's not. This isn't part of the state family assistance grant, so while it's in the same section as TANF directly, it is a 4A program. Some of the things that apply specifically to TANF do not apply here, but I would think so. I will admit I haven't gone back and looked at that really closely.
But it's not limited. This isn't limited to families receiving assistance. So if someone's timed out, as long as they're needy, they would be eligible.
Right.
And what about immigrants?
Easy one on the immigration issue.
What's that?
I'll let you take the easy one on the immigration citizenship issue.
We're definitely going to have to get back on that, but I would, I'll just leave it at that. We're going to have to look at the immigration questions more closely. So be sure we should have that as a written question that we can look at a little later.
Okay, thanks. Now there's some questions about when will states receive their funds? Do we have to wait for approval after submission on or before April 25th? If so, what do you expect the turnaround time to be between requesting funds and receiving funds?
So I don't know exactly the mechanics of the when and how, but I know that expenditures, if you didn't get your funds immediately, expenditures back to April 1st would still be allowable expenditures. I'll let Peter or Susan speak a little more to the logistics.
Well, we've been working closely with the Office of Grants Management, and they're the ones that will actually award the grants and I guess transfer the funds into the state's account. So our hope and theirs is as well is that after the request comes in, those funds will be made available, within a week. There's no real approval. It's this request that has to be the request that the form that you'll receive shortly has to be signed by your cabinet level official overseeing the TANF program. But this does not require any amendment to the state plan. So it's really just asking for the money. And, I saw one question was sort of, how do we know how much to ask? Well, in a sense, you don't know how much you're going to use. You have almost 2 years or a year and a half to spend it. And if you've asked for too little, you might be sorry. If you ask for too much and you don't spend it, then it goes into a pot later on. So it's really to your advantage to probably seek the full allotment if you intend to, in fact, do this program.
I'd add one other thing about the timing. As most of you know, the legislation also includes a refundable child tax credit. So between July and December, many low-income families will be getting a significant boost in income from that child tax credit. They might get additional income when they file their taxes. So the need for these emergency funds could be different over different periods of the availability of the funds. So that might be something you consider in terms of how, when you spend the money.
We're trying to gauge demand if you might be offering cash, lump sum cash.
Well, and that also gives states some time to think about just how to do it. And, maybe it doesn't have to happen in a heartbeat.
And there's a question if the request can be submitted by email. Yes, we will be trying to get out as soon as possible the request form, which will have a specific email address to return the form to.
Yeah, we have a form that's almost ready to go, and we specifically designed it so you could submit it by email, since we're not in the office, and most of you aren't either. It's a fillable PDF with a place for a signature, and if there are problems with that, just work with the program manager in your region, and we'll get it sorted out. But we're hopeful that it should work pretty smoothly.
Okay, there's a question of, can you define needy? Are we defining needy?
Well, I think just like under TANF, states define needy and can define needy for one non-recurrent short-term benefit differently from another non-recurrent short-term benefit.
Will states need to contribute any additional MOE as a condition of receiving these funds?
No?
Okay, so there's a bunch of questions. Again, for clarity, this is not limited to current TANF families. Is that correct?
Correct.
TANF cash families.
Although, no, it's not limited there. We understand that some states may decide the simplest thing to do is to kind of give a boost to current TANF recipient families, but there's no requirement to do it that way. And the needs in your community may be different.
Right. Or similarly, a state might decide to give a boost to SNAP families and add funds onto the SNAP EBT card.
Can funds be spent on 18 to 24-year-olds without dependents?
We'd have to know what kind of non-recurrent short-term benefit would apply to that group. I can't think of something off the top of my head. Julie?
Yeah, I would want to see some more detail on that before we could really answer it. Generally 4A programs are for needy families with children. So we'd have to see more.
Is April 25th the last day to request funds? Yes, for states. There's a different deadline for territories and tribes. And there was also a question about if tribes and territories would have different guidelines on what the funds can be spent on.
I don't think there'll be different guidelines on what they can be spent on. Like you said, Deborah, the law gives them 90 days rather than 45 to submit the request. And the other difference under the law is that the 15% admin cap doesn't apply to tribes. So I don't know quite how that is going to play out. Presumably there'll be, I think tribes normally have negotiated admin caps. I would think that it would be something like that. But on the state side, 15% admin cap. I don't think there's anything else in the law that is different other than the whole allotment formula between tribes and states.
Thanks. Okay, there's another question about how will supplanting be determined?
Well, I think each state official will have to sign a form saying that they're certifying that there won't be any supplantation. And I think the only way it might be determined would be through an audit if there was something that came up.
Well, that would be how we would monitor it. And we've actually built that into the request form so that you won't have two forms to submit. There will be a certification section that will include the reference to not supplanting, which again is from the law. We may have to look at that a little bit more closely, but I am sure that council in all of your states will have some notion about how to make sure that you're not supplanting.
Quite frankly, we don't think any of you would supplant.
Is there a penalty for not expending all the requested funds?
No, there isn't a penalty. I mean, the funds would, if you didn't expend them all by the end of the period, we take them back and redistribute them. So, I mean, it's not a penalty, but they wouldn't sit there for you to expend at a later date.
Well, and the only other penalty might be that you wouldn't be considered for any reallotment. I mean, that's not a penalty, but.
Okay, and there's been a couple questions. I know Susan mentioned it before, but to clarify, and this will be, clarified in our guidance further, but at this point, we're saying we are not requiring an amendment to state plans for these funds.
Right. Our read of this is that the TANF state plan is really separate from this pandemic emergency assistance fund. So you wouldn't need a state plan to do a non-recurrent short-term benefit that you don't already have under TANF. Now, if you didn't and you wanted to keep doing it with TANF, then you would need an amendment to the TANF part of the plan, but you don't need one for these funds.
Okay, and again, a bunch of questions about the state allotment. So we're gonna hope to get those two states, hopefully Monday, definitely early next week, hopefully post on our website and email to your TANF directors. Thank you for all these good questions coming in. Will you issue a FAQ about the fund?
Probably. We're working on a couple of guidance documents now, follow up to our first PI of FAQs on the COVID-19, as well as a guidance document that will sort of be an initial one about this fund and the new form, and then there probably will be things we didn't think of in our first guidance on this fund, and we'll have to follow up with that. I'm sure there will be things that we either didn't think of or couldn't answer right away. So, but we're going to try to get you as much guidance as quickly as we can.
I'm just looking through the questions. Did you want to say a little more just about what it means to supplement versus supplant, like we've been talking about a little bit, that so that when people go to certify that on their request form, they know what that means?
Peter?
Well, I think a lot of the types of benefits that you might provide are things that you typically haven't provided in the past. For example, if you provide a cash supplement to all TANF families, if you haven't done something like that in the past, that wouldn't really be supplantation. That's something completely new. Now, if you're a state that has done like diversion payments, for example, to families, you might consider only counting the amount of diversion payments above, the amount that you had provided in a previous year or whatever, in some previous period. So as long as you're not replacing something, I think that you've been doing all along, then you don't really have to worry about it.
Okay, I see a few questions about a one-time boost in payments or mass issuance of payments to assist families. Would that be considered allowable?
Right, and that's what I was talking about before. And we're going to try to a little more precise with language when we get some guidance out, but that basically the way that that is okay now is that this is a crisis situation, a specific crisis situation, rather than an episode of need. And so we'll write a little bit more about that, but the idea is to make it simple and easy for you and for us. Deborah's got the hardest job here, reading and talking and answering some of them all at the same time.
Peter, this one could be for you. Are reporting requirements limited to single entry on line 15 of the ACF 196R? Do states need details about specific expenditure categories?
Well, the only two expenditure categories that you would fill in the column, I think it's going to be column E, which will be for this pandemic fund, would be the non-recurrent short-term benefit and the administrative expenses. We're also going to open up the line for awards, total expenditures. You probably have to fill in unliquidated obligations. So there are a couple of things you'll have to fill in, but it's not going to look too different from the existing form. The only thing is we're only going to open up a few of the rows based on the expenditures.
Okay, what if states wanted to use funds for pandemic-related costs that occurred before the funds were issued? Can that be allowable?
Only back to April 1st.
Because the law states an applicable period, correct? And it starts April 1st.
Which I say back to, we're not at April 1st yet, but it
seems
presumably,
like, yeah.
Okay, and clarity again that there is no MOE requirement, additional MOE requirement attached to these funds.
correct.
And will there be any reporting requirements besides the 196R for how the funds are expended?
I don't think so. I think that's going to be it for states. Each, tribes will have a financial reporting form and territories will also, but for states, the 196R. I don't think so.
And I would say that's not because we're not interested in knowing more information about what you will be doing, but with our limited statutory authority to request you all to submit information. But as part of our technical assistance plans, we will be reaching out to, find, best practices, new approaches, things that have worked as a way to share with each other and to think about how the lessons we learned from this experience potentially for the future. So you might be getting more formal.
April 1st, 2021. Julie said back to it because if you request your funds after April 1st, states have up until April 25th, 2021 to request their funds. So if you request on April 20th and you receive your funds a few days after that, you could use those funds on expenses back to April 1st, 2021. But that's
exactly right. Not 2020, it's 2021.
Right. And for states, the deadline is April 25th, 2021. For tribes and territories, it is June 9th.
June 9th. Yeah. And yeah, exactly.
And there's timeframes, questions about when the request form will be available and when the updated 196R will be available. I think as soon as possible.
Right.
And this is typical bureaucracy because just by the fact of asking for you all to submit to us as the law requires how much money you want, one would typically have to go through the whole Paperwork Reduction Act process, which can take multiple months. So we're actually applying for a waiver of that, and we're waiting for that approval of that waiver. And once that comes, hopefully sometime next week, we will get that form out to you right away.
And yes, when we say April 1st, 2021, that means that we can only use the funds for occurrence that happened after that date and up until September 30th, 2022, correct?
Right. Right. If you incurred an expenditure or something before that, you couldn't use these funds for that. You would have to only from April 1st, 2021. And both of those dates are April 25th and June 9th, I think also June 9th, are happen over the weekend. So I guess we're going to seek some clarity on that, whether that means Monday or not. But you know, if I were in your shoes, I'd want to get it in before that. And it's going to go to an email box, so it isn't like we have to receive it physically during office hours. But I'll see what we can find out about that.
And just again, that will require a signature from the cabinet level person overseeing.
Right. So your commissioner or
secretary.
Secretary or whatever the title is that you use for your 4A agency head.
And again, a lot of questions have come in, and just to keep sort of clarifying that these funds are not limited to current TANF participants, although current TANF participants can receive them.
And any other specific questions on allowable uses, again, like we said, can be emailed to your regional program manager, and we'll hope to address as many of those as possible in future guidance or individually to states as they are asked.
And Deborah, I think I see someone's asking how they'll know what their maximum allotment is. And that's the table we're going to produce for you that will list, you know, every state and what the amount is. And I mean, I guess it's probably not likely we'll get it out today, but we're going to try to do it on Monday.
And but that formula is specified in the law.
Right.
Let's see, any other?
To see if there's any further that we've missed. Thank you again so much, everyone, for your questions. How are the allotments decided? Do you want to go back to that slide where we talk about the allotments and what was specified in the law?
Yeah, I did kind of breeze over that, didn't I? There we are. Okay, so for the 92.5% of funds, or the 923 million that go to states and DC, there's a two-part formula as this slide explains. And again, this comes straight out of the law. Half of the formula comes from the number of children in your state. The other half is based on, is it FY19 expenditures, Peter? On non-recurrent short-term benefits, basic assistance, and emergency assistance. So the number crunchers put those two together and have come up with a formula there that gets you to your amount. The rest of the funds for the tribes and territories have a different formula, but for the states, that's set quite clearly in the law.
I actually have a question the last few minutes for our states. If you all were to sort of, you could put into the question, my question for you all are, what do you anticipate as being, is anything might be problematic in terms of you're all getting the funds and getting them out there to support families? Are there some issues that you see that might make it difficult? And you know, if we know some of these questions, we can, or these issues, we can try and see if there are ways that we can help to address them. And I'm particularly curious about those states that may not have an NRST program. We noticed there were about 9 states that had no spending on NRSTs last fiscal year. So curious about those as well. So any feedback on that into the question?
And while people are typing that, I think I saw one that maybe we didn't get to that was basically asking, could a family receive both TANF cash assistance and non-recurrent short-term benefit under the pandemic fund? And the answer is yes, they could. I mean, they would have to meet the criteria that you set up in the state, the financial and other criteria, but yeah, there's no prohibition on receiving funding from both.
But the financial criteria, Julie, could be that they're receiving TANF assistance. That would also make them eligible for the NRST, right?
They could set this financial criteria to be the same, yeah.
And Peter, were those child population numbers from 2019 or 2020?
They're the latest numbers that are available. Our colleagues at the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation pulled them. So they would be the latest census estimates. And I believe they were from 2019. And, you know, we don't have data from the 2020 decennial census yet, which would have been better, but so that's what they used. Of course, unless there's a large discrepancy, you know, it's not going to have a massive change in the dollar amounts.
And I think, Deborah, I see somebody asked, could they have a new non-recurrent short-term benefit that they don't currently have? And yes, it doesn't have to be what you do through your TANF grant. You can have something that's new. If you then want to continue it and fund it with your TANF SFAG, you would need to put that in the state plan, but you don't need to for the Pandemic Emergency Assistance Fund.
Here's an interesting question too. The questions keep moving though. Is a one-time extra payment to current TANF recipients preferred due to the lack of red tape for backup paperwork, or is a diversion type payment, which is lots of backup documentation requirements, rent, for example, verification, et cetera, preferred? And I mean, from our perspective, we don't have a preference. It's really from your all's, you know, where you may well prefer something that has less red tape, as you call it. That really is kind of a state choice. But in terms of getting funds out quickly, and of course you can do both as well. There's nothing to say, this isn't just one thing. You can have multiple types of benefits that are NRSTs supported with the funds.
And there's some questions about if the payments will be disregarded by other public assistance programs like SNAP. We may or may not know the answer. We may have to check with our.
I don't think that, certainly the requirement to disregard that applies to the child tax credits and applies to the stimulus rebates, that I don't see how that would apply here. Those are tax code issues. But beyond, I don't know beyond that, but the way that what we wrote to you before about some of the pandemic relief and having to disregard it based on the American Taxpayer Act provision. I don't think that would apply here, but let us look into it and see if there's any sort of requirement about it.
And there's a few like detailed scenarios coming in that we may need to review more carefully and get back to you all, again, either through, hopefully through guidance for everyone, so everyone can benefit from knowing about these different scenarios, and also individually. We thank you for, some folks are responding through questions to Susan's question, and we appreciate that. That will help us think about best ways to implement and support you all as you're figuring out how to use these funds. And there was a question about, what about funding increased caseload? I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Well, certainly the caseload refers to basic assistance, and so these funds can't be used for basic assistance.
Right.
Okay, and again, we hope to provide further guidance about whether there has to be a specific crisis, or if the COVID-19 pandemic can be identified as the crisis. That was a question that just came in, and we hope to provide Julie talked about that a little bit, but we hope to provide.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be possible to do it, and we'll get you some more, you know, we'll be putting out guidance that will speak to this more carefully, I guess, with, you know, some clarity with that. But at the very least, it still has to meet a TANF purpose, and it still has to, families have to be financially and otherwise eligible. But as I said, we think that this is a specific crisis situation rather than individual episodes of need. Although you could do that as well, you could have more than one. So, but we'll get some guidance out on that soon.
One comment I see raised here was the sort of the challenge that their agencies getting multiple funds from multiple programs, sometimes that where allowable uses overlap, and also have same or similar time frames for using the funds. And the example was given emergency rental assistance, which in effect is an NRST. And I would think there's no problem in combining funds or using multiple funding streams for the same type of benefit. If the need is there, you could supplement the emergency rental assistance funds with the funds from this pandemic emergency fund.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Susan. And from our perspective, the biggest thing will be when we get you the form to submit your allotment request and commitment form by the due date. Then once you have that, then you've got a good period in which to spend these funds through September 30, 2022. But the first thing will be to be sure that the commissioner or secretary or whomever is able to sign the form, and it's just signing it electronically and getting it into us.
And there's a question here, is this a lump sum award or an installment?
Well, certainly if you have the expenditures, you could have, I think it'll be awarded as a lump sum, but even if it weren't, if for some reason you felt like you had to spend the whole allotment in the first quarter, you would have access to the full amount.
Yeah.
think we've gotten to most of them. If we
Yeah.
haven't gotten to your question again, we will get back to you, or, you can retype it in case we missed it.
In all caps, so we can really hear it.
And again, questions that you continue to have that we've not answered, you can certainly forward to your regional contact, and then it will, we can begin to answer it. And we do intend to have another webinar fairly soon that's sort of more thinking about programmatically, how do you want to use the funds and what are different options. So, it seems like we've got.
I see somebody's asking about the cabinet level official, and I don't know what state you're from, or we could look that up. But it's, essentially what we're saying is your 4A director. That's usually a secretary or a commissioner. That sometimes the title is different, but the person who is over all of your 4A programs is what we're looking for. Not your TANF director, the next rung or so up.
Like
right?
the department head within which your TANF agency is located. So, State Department of Human Services or Human Resources or various names.
So I see you said Georgia, and I think that is in Georgia. It is Robin Crittenden, if I got that right. We like to give all the technical assistance we can.
All right. So I kind of feel we've come to, we'll give you cede 1 minute back to everyone in their afternoon. Get your Friday started 1 minute early. But thank you everyone for participating. We will continue to monitor these questions and make sure we've answered them, find ways to get the information back to you all. We'll have the allotments out, hopefully posted on Monday, and with a form and PI to follow shortly thereafter. And we look forward to working with all of you to use this fund in a way that will really help support families. Thanks to Julie and Deborah and Peter for answering and managing the questions, and for ICF and BLH for creating this infrastructure, which worked really great for this webinar.
Thanks to all of you out there for all that you're doing to support vulnerable families and partnering with us on this.
Yes. All right, everyone, have a great afternoon and a great weekend. Thank you all.